We've heard Billie Eilish's song about him, but who was Augustus and why does he matter? Emperor Augustus was the first emperor of Rome, the man who pulled the plug on the Roman Republic and turned the bathwater of ancient Rome into wine. His 45-year reign from 27 BC to AD 14 ushered in the Pax Romana, a 200-year era of peace and prosperity that enabled Rome to grow from a regional Italian power into a global superpower spanning 3 continents. But how did this commoner kid from a small town in central Italy pull off this transformation? And what can we learn from his rise and rule? That's what we'll cover in this episode of Crash Course Kings and Queens. Our story begins not with Augustus, because that wasn't even his name, but with his birth in 63 BC as Gaius Octavius to a minor equestrian family in the small town of Velletri near Rome. The family name, Octavius, is still a common Italian surname today, but back then, being an equestrian didn't carry much political weight. Being a member of the patrician class did, though young Gaius had none of that, so his chances of rising to power seemed slim. However, that changed when his great-uncle, Julius Caesar, got assassinated in 44 BC for in Caesar's will, he named young Gaius as his grandnephew, an adopted heir. This made Gaius eligible for the top offices in Rome, including the consulship, and entitled him to half of Caesar's vast fortune, which made him incredibly rich. With these new resources, the 18-year-old took on the name of Gaius Julius Caesar, Octavianus, and set about seizing more power for himself. With a few allies, he formed the second triumvirate with Mark Antony and Lepidus, named Triumvirs to defeat Caesar's assassins. The Triumvirs divided the Mediterranean among themselves and then defeated Caesar's assassins at Philippi in 42 BC. Once that was done, though the Triumvirs turned on each other, Octavian defeated Mark Antony and Cleopatra at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC, annexing Egypt and becoming Rome's sole ruler by 30 BC. At this point he dropped the title of Triumvir but picked up the titles of Augustus and Princeps, which literally means first citizen, though it carried with it connotations of first among equals and Pontifex Maximus or chief priest of Roman religion. These titles were important because they helped Augustus to disguise the fact that he was really a king, an emperor, a monarch, despite his claim to be merely the first citizen of Rome. See, back in the day, the Romans really liked their republics and the idea that they were a constitutional democracy, even if in reality only a handful of elite Roman families held most of the power. So to avoid looking like a power-hungry dictator, Augustus put on a show. Through a series of constitutional maneuvers, he accumulated powers that previous Roman rulers never had, but he always made sure to do so gradually and incrementally so that it wouldn't look like he was trying to stage a coup and destroy the republic. One of his greatest propaganda coups came in 27 BC, when he proclaimed the republic restored and gave back its institutions and symbols to the Senate and people of Rome. On the surface, it looked like Augustus was stepping down from power, but in reality, he retained command of Rome's legions and kept ruling the most prosperous parts of the empire, including Egypt, Syria, Gaul, and the central Italian provinces. And he did all of this while making himself seem like a humble servant of the Republic, a devotee of traditional Roman values, a patron of poets and the arts who presided over what would become known as the Golden Age of Rome. It was during Augustus's reign that Rome reached its greatest territorial extent, and the Pax Romana began a period of 2 centuries with remarkable peace and prosperity, during which Rome grew from a collection of loosely connected Italian city-states into a fully fledged empire stretching from the North Sea to the Arabian Sea. It was also during Augustus' reign that Rome's population exploded from less than 1 million to nearly 2 million people thanks to low taxes, economic growth, public works projects like roads, aqueducts and harbors, and the introduction of standardized currency throughout the empire. The result was an unprecedented flourishing of trade, travel and cultural exchange across Eurasia and North Africa. But Augustus wasn't just a benevolent monarch who sat on his throne and let things happen to him. He enacted sweeping administrative reforms that made possible the effective governance of such a large, diverse, and distant empire. Most importantly, he reorganized the provinces into imperial provinces governed directly by legates or deputies appointed by the emperor, and senatorial provinces governed by proconsuls, that is, senators elected by the voting assemblies. This division of labor allowed Rome to raise a standing army of 28 legions that were permanently employed by the state rather than by private generals. Augustus also fixed gubernatorial salaries and set maximum terms of office for governors to curb corruption. but he also passed moral legislation requiring men to marry and women to remain chaste, though he himself divorced twice and his daughter Julia was infamous for her promiscuity, which is why he exiled her after she gave birth to twins. On the domestic front, he created the Praetorian Guard, elite bodyguards for the emperor, as well as fire brigades and municipal police forces for the city of Rome. But one of Augustus's greatest accomplishments was the way he managed to step away from power. When his adoptive father died, Rome was in chaos. There were civil wars, assassinations, conspiracies, and nobody knew where the power lay. So Augustus seized upon this moment of confusion to consolidate power for himself. But once he was firmly in control, he did not want his successors to come to power in the same way. So although he adopted Tiberius as his heir, he didn't pass down any laws or precedents about how imperial succession should work. So instead, there was a whole lot of scheming and jockeying and murdering to determine who would succeed him, which may have been part of the reason why Tiberius spent the first 9 years of his reign traveling around the empire pretending to be insane. And that's the end of part 1. Next time, we'll see how Tiberius got the real power in Rome. If you want to help keep this content free for everyone forever, you can join our community on a crowdfunding platform. As a thank you, we'll give you behind-the-scenes fun stuff like bloopers and outtakes. Thanks for watching this episode, which was filmed at a studio and was made in partnership with a digital studio and nature.